Before we start, I would encourage you to have a set of the sermon notes. If you don't already have them, just go to the link below. You'll be able to print a set of the sermon notes from that link. Also want to encourage you to have some communion elements. You want to have some bread or a cracker. You want to have some juice or wine. If you don't have juice or wine, probably anything to drink would work. But you'll want to have those communion elements because here in about 20 minutes, when we get to the end of the sermon, we'll move right into a time of communion. So if you need any of those things, I would encourage you to pause the video right now. Get whatever you need, and once everything is ready, then go ahead and resume the playback. So I want to take you back in time to July of 1983. There was a baseball game taking place in New York at Yankee Stadium. Going into the ninth inning, the visiting team had 3 runs, and the New York Yankees had 4 runs, which meant all the Yankees had to do was just hold the visiting team scoreless in the top of the ninth, and the Yankees would win the game. Now, in the top of the ninth, the visiting team did manage to get 1 runner on base, but they were now down to their final at-bat, or at least their final out. There were 2 outs when a future Hall of Famer stepped up to the plate. Now, some of you already know the incident to which I'm referring, but for those of you who don't, this future Hall of Famer promptly hit a home run, and suddenly the Yankees went from leading the game 4-3. Now they trailed the visiting team 5-4, which meant all the visiting team was going to have to do in the bottom of the ninth was hold the Yankees scoreless, and the visiting team would have essentially stolen a victory from Yankee Stadium. But as this future Hall of Famer crossed home plate, the Yankees manager, Billy Martin, went out and had a few words with the home plate umpire, at which point the home plate umpire went to the visiting team's dugout and asked to see the bat that was just used to hit this home run. Home plate umpire rolled this bat around in the dirt, and out of nowhere, the home plate umpire declared that the batter, in fact, was out, and that meant that was the 3rd out of the inning, which meant that those 2 runs didn't count, which meant that the Yankees had just won the game 4-3. Now, that future Hall of Famer that had hit that home run that had now been disallowed was, of course, George Brett, who played, of course, for the Kansas City Royals. And the incident to which I'm referring is the pine tar incident. The reason that the home plate umpire had called George Brett out, and this rule that the Yankees manager, Billy Martin, had dusted off from the very back of the rule book, was a rule from the earliest days of organized baseball that said that you were not allowed to have pine tar too far up on the batting surface of the bat. You could have the pine tar down on the grip of the bat to help you with your grip, but you weren't supposed to have that pine tar too far up on the batting surface. Not because it gave you any sort of advantage. In fact, I would argue that having pine tar too far up on the batting surface of the bat would actually work more against you than it would help you. But in the earliest days of Major League Baseball, they would try to get through an entire game with as few baseball used as possible. Unlike today, in which there is a new baseball that's used practically every single pitch of the game. Back then, they wanted to get through the entire game with as few balls used as possible. And the problem was if you had pine tar too far up on the batting surface of the bat, that pine tar would transfer to the baseball. It would gum up the baseball, mess up the baseball. They didn't want that. Thus, you had this antiquated rule. Now, if you're wondering, had this pine tar rule been used before? Was it used on a regular basis? The answer is that this was a rarely, if ever, used rule. The other thing that I would point out is that Billy Martin undoubtedly had noticed earlier in the game that George Brett's bat had pine tar that extended up onto the batting surface of the bat, and he had probably just filed that away in case he needed it. And after George Brett hit that home run, boy, did he need that. And so that was when, and he told the umpire. Now, if you remember, as I do, the footage of that game, you will remember that after the umpire called George Brett out, that George Brett lost his mind. He went ballistic. He went running out of the dugout. He ran up to the umpire, bumped into the umpire, and started screaming at him. But it did not obviously change the umpire's mind. And so, of course, the Royals filed a protest. And look, I don't know the percentage of games that when they are protested, that those protests are honored, but I can tell you that the percentage is very small. I don't know the exact percentage, but it is very rare that a protest is actually upheld. But in this particular case, it was just a few days later that the American League Commissioner upheld the Royals' protest. The American League Commissioner said that the home run, in fact, did count because the use of this archaic rule that was never used, that was from the dusty annals of baseball lore, that the use of this rule violated, in his words, the spirit of the game. In other words, what the American League Commissioner was saying was that this was something that was small and was ticky-tacky, and that the spirit of the game was what was far more important. And so, if you know the rest of the story, you know that not long after that, that the Yankees and the Royals then got together and they played the rest of the ninth inning, and that, in fact, in the bottom of the ninth, the Royals held the Yankees scoreless, and the Royals ended up winning that game 5-4, which is as it should be, because I am not a Yankees fan. But the reason that I'm telling you that story is because this idea that there can be little ticky-tacky rules, but there can be something that's bigger and more important. It feels like that is the issue at the heart of the passage we're about to take a look at. The lectionary reading, the lectionary gospel reading, I should say, for July 5th of 2026 is Matthew 11:28 through 12:24. Starting in 11:28, Jesus is speaking and says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." Jesus answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath, and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man there with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Jesus said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into the pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So the man stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. May God bless the reading of the fascinating word. So this is an interesting passage, isn't it? And my guess is that most of this passage sounded familiar to you. "Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened." I think all of us have heard those words before. The occasion when Jesus and his disciples were walking through the fields. The disciples were plucking heads of grain and eating them because they were hungry, but it was the Sabbath. The Pharisees jumped Jesus' case about it. You probably remember that story. The man who's in the synagogue with the shriveled hand. And the Pharisees say, "So, are you going to heal him? You realize it's a Sabbath, right?" And Jesus goes ahead and heals him. You are probably familiar with that story as well. It's interesting to see those all here back to back to back. And so what I'd like to do is what we always do. Let's talk through this passage. Let's see if we can understand a little bit better what Jesus was trying to convey in this passage. And then after we talk through the passage, then we'll focus on three of the truths that this passage has for you and me as Jesus' modern-day disciples. So the start of the passage, these classic words from Jesus. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And he says, "Take my yoke upon you." Now, of course, you know that when he's referring to this yoke, he's not referring to an egg yolk here. He's talking about the large wooden beam that was placed over the back and the shoulders and the neck of an ox or another beast of burden, and then was attached to a plow or was attached to a grinding wheel. But these were huge and heavy, and they forced an ox or a different beast of burden to pull something even heavier. And what Jesus was saying is, look, I know that many of you have yokes in a figurative sense that you are carrying around on your shoulders as well. He's saying, I want you to get rid of those burdens, and I want you to carry my yoke as easy, because the yoke that I will give you, it's easy. The burden that I will give you, comparatively speaking, is incredibly light. Then, of course, we have Jesus immediately afterwards with the disciples walking through the fields. The disciples pick some grain. No big deal, except that it's the Sabbath. And you were not supposed to, quote unquote, work on the Sabbath and to pluck a head of grain. As far as the religious leaders there were concerned, well, that was working on the Sabbath. I know that seems ridiculous, but that was the issue here. And so you notice that what Jesus does is respond by citing not just one, but two incidents or two precedents from the Old Testament where that is what happened, and says, look, if that happened, then what my disciples just did, it is perfectly fine. He says, Jesus says something greater than the temple is here, and he's referring to himself as the Messiah. And Jesus says something interesting in verse 7. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Now, it's interesting that Jesus quotes this passage right here because he actually quoted this passage back in Matthew chapter 9 in a passage that we looked at just a few weeks ago. And so if you watch these sermon videos on a regular basis, you know that we talked about this not long ago. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, is where God was speaking through the prophet Hosea about 700 years before this. God was frustrated with the Hebrews because they were so busy following all of the rules, like the rules about the sacrifices that had to be offered at the temple, that they were forgetting the most important thing, that they lost sight of the big picture. They were not showing mercy to their fellow man, to their brothers and to their sisters. And what God had said through the prophet Hosea is, I desire mercy. I desire to treat your brothers and sisters the right way, more than I want you to follow all of the little rules about the sacrifices, for example, that need to be offered at the temple. And then Jesus concludes what he says here to the religious leaders by saying that the Son of Man, in other words, he, the Messiah, he says, Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So basically what Jesus was saying to them is, I'm the Messiah and I get to decide what's right and wrong where the Sabbath is concerned, and I'm telling you it was just fine what my disciples just did. From there, they go to the local synagogue. And when they get to the local synagogue, it just so happens, wow, isn't this a fun coincidence, that there's a man there with a shriveled hand. Now, there's no doubt that this was a setup, because the Pharisees had already said, well, your disciples were out of line for working on the Sabbath by plucking heads of grain and eating them. Now let's see if we can get Jesus to do something wrong on the Sabbath. It tells us right there, they were looking for a reason to bring charges against him. And so they said, hey, check out that guy there with the shriveled hand. Is it lawful, Jesus, for you? Because we know that you could do it. We know that you could heal him. Is it lawful for you to heal him on the Sabbath? And Jesus' response is, look, if one of you had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, what would you do? You would rescue it. And you know what that would be? That would be work according to your rules. But you would do it because that's the right thing to do. And if you would do that for one of your sheep, then why should I not help one of our fellow human beings? And so Jesus does, in fact, heal this man. And it tells us that at that point, the religious leaders started actively looking for a way that they could bring Jesus' life to an end. So, what I want to do now very quickly, because I'm getting short on time, is I want to talk about three of the truths that this passage has for us. And the first truth comes from that first paragraph. As disciples, Jesus wants us to find rest in him. As disciples, Jesus wants us to find rest in him. The simple point that I'm going to quickly make here is that you know that we live in a society where people are never getting as much rest as they should. People are not getting enough rest at night. People are overtaxing themselves during the day as well. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to seek the rest that Jesus is offering us. He says, throw off the burdens that society is placing on you. Maybe you're placing on yourself, other people, whoever. Throw off those burdens and find rest in me. And that's what you and I need to do. Is it always easy? No. But that is what you and I are supposed to do. That is the first truth this passage has for us. The second truth is this. As disciples, there are times when we must look beyond the letter of the law. As disciples, there are times when we must look beyond the letter of the law. Now, if you're wondering if I'm about to say something heretical, the answer is I don't think that I'm about to say something heretical. But look, there are people like the Pharisees in this passage who are incredibly legalistic. And if I'm being painfully honest with you, I will confess to you that when I was younger, I was a bit of a legalist myself. And I'm not proud of that fact. And I try really hard not to be a legalist now. But even now, I still run into legalists all the time. I shouldn't say all the time, but I do run into people who are Christian legalists, kind of the Christian Pharisees of the modern day, and that's always frustrating. It's always disappointing. I'm going to tell you this story very quickly because I am really short on time, but I officiated a funeral not too long ago. And after the service was over and the lobby was full, there was one person who came up to me and he started yelling at me. Why did he start yelling at me, you're wondering? Yeah, I wondered the same thing. The reason that he started yelling at me was because I had referred to heaven in the funeral, but I had also referred to it almost on an alternating basis. I had referred to it as heaven, but I also referred to it as a better place. Why is he so upset? He says, I can't stand it when people use that phrase, a better place. The Bible never uses the phrase a better place. It uses the word heaven. You should use the word heaven and nothing but the word heaven. And I was like, whoa, dude, oh, I'm sorry. I hear you, but I don't want to keep saying heaven. I don't want to sound like I don't have a thesaurus at my disposal. I kind of use those two terms interchangeably. But he was just absolutely making a scene, yelling at me in the lobby of this funeral home because I had referred to heaven as a better place. And the point that I simply want to make is, you know, if he had really been upset about that, probably the better thing to do would be to come and to talk to me quietly about it and not make a scene. Because here's the sad thing. When people remember that funeral, are they going to remember the nice things about the person who passed away that were said during that service? Are they going to remember the nice tribute that this person's grandchild made about them? No. What people are going to remember about that funeral was the scene that this one guy made who was yelling at the preacher from the service. And that's tragic as far as I'm concerned. And it's missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that we should be kind at all times and not get hung up on ticky-tacky little things. That's what Jesus was saying in this passage. That's why he quoted Hosea 6:6. And what I'm saying is that should we follow all of the letters of the law to the best of our ability? Absolutely, we should. But there are times when maybe we need to say to ourselves, I'm looking at the bigger picture here. I'm going to let that one go. That is the second point that I want to make. The third that I'm going to quickly make is this. As disciples, we must remember that one way is better than all the others. Jesus' way. As disciples, we must remember that one way is better than all the others. Jesus' way. And look, I know you're saying to yourself right now, well, duh, Pastor Kerry, I know that. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that Jesus' way is the best way. And I'm glad that we can verbally acknowledge that with each other. But what I want to point out to you is that even though you and I might verbally acknowledge that with each other, that a lot of times if you watch my actions, and maybe when people watch your actions, that what they're going to say is, yeah, he may say that Jesus' way is the best way, but when I watch what Kerry does, it sure seems like he's doing things his own way. Or for that matter, I think for a lot of people, when I view their actions, I think to myself, wow, they really seem to be doing things the way of their favorite politician or their favorite political party. And that's true regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, or their favorite political commentator, their favorite pundit, their favorite celebrity, their favorite influencer, their favorite blogger. The list goes on. And what I'm telling you is that all of those people, and even our own selves and our own opinions, even our family members, is that the best way? No. Jesus' way is the best way. And we are out of time. Very quickly, I want to transition into our time of communion. I want to remind you that when Jesus was with the disciples in the upper room, he said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." I want you to grab your communion elements. I'm going to go ahead and grab mine. The video is going to cut me off here in just a few seconds, but I'm going to invite you to go ahead and start partaking with me at this time of the body of Christ, broken for us. We partake in remembrance of him. And the blood of Christ shed for us, we drink in remembrance of him. Let's pray. God, we thank you for Jesus' example in this passage. We pray that you would help us to look beyond the ticky-tacky things to the greater good.